had a dream. While I couldn't remember much, I recalled standing before thousands of threads of light with a pair of scissors. In each thread was a life. I ran my hands through them, tangling them with each other. I pruned the wilting branches and cut the sharp splinters from others. After a while, I found a branch perfect in length and shape. I took hold of it and broke it off for myself. The other branches rustled as though hit with a light breeze. The tree filled with tiny cracks, and just before it fractured, I woke up. Days blurred together into a hazy, drab mush. I moved along for years in total autopilot. Every conversation seemed to have a predetermined outcome. Everything that happened was either predictable or inconsequential. I lost my identity. The world felt as empty as I did. It was easy to trudge through the days, saying the words I needed to say and doing what I needed to do, but my life's plot was gone. At the time, I couldn't tell if something was missing from me or the world, but it soon became apparent. After my dream, I had an indescribable, overwhelming feeling that change was coming. When the light spilled through the gaps in my blinds and roused me from sleep, a newfound thirst for life awoke in me. It was early, just after sunrise. I put on some clothes and walked out into the hall. Mum fussed around in the kitchen. I still lived with her since graduating, even through my jobs as a barista and waitress, while I applied for some more respectable career positions, whatever that meant. Family portraits lined the corridor. Until I was 17, there were a dozen snapshots of me, my dad, my mum, and my sister at parks and aquariums. He was gone from then on. After that, there were fewer photos. My senior portrait sat next to a photo of the dean handing my sister her degree. She had a bright smile, and the decorations of valedictorian hanging from her cap. I walked into the kitchen. Mum was always an early riser. She liked to watch the sunrise from the balcony while drinking her morning coffee. Sometimes I'd catch her before dawn, and we'd sit in silence until the colours broke the horizon. She caught me coming in and put down her spatula. "Good morning, Alexis. Did you sleep all right?" she asked. Mum noticed my mental state a while back. She simply let me do my thing, probably hoping it would pass. She wasn't much better for a long time. After Dad died, our lives lost a whole lot of colour. Pair that with the usual anxiety of not knowing what to do with my life, and things went downhill. "I think so. I had a weird dream, but I can't remember it. You know, I hate talking about dreams. So boring. Sit down. Breakfast is almost ready." She shoveled extra browned eggs onto plates alongside soggy French toast and charred bacon. Mum was not a cook, but the effort was nice regardless. We sat down and dug in. Most of the meal was silent. Not uncomfortable silence, just a moment of appreciation. "You know, today is your father and I's anniversary," she said in between bites. Her fork trembled as she brought it to her mouth. That explained the elaborate breakfast. "Yeah, it is." It was still hard to talk about. All the birthdays and anniversaries were tinged with melancholy, now for 6 years. "I'm so sorry for keeping you here. I had no right to ask you to stay with me this long," Mum told me. She always gets sentimental on anniversaries. Mum broke down after Dad died. I wanted to leave for college, but Mum not so subtly implied that home would fall apart without my help. I didn't resent her for it, but she believed I did. "I don't mind. I might have needed it too," I said. "By the way, have you heard from Macy lately? She hasn't been in touch for 2 weeks," I asked. "Wasn't she excited about a new product line she's launching?" Mum put her fork down and cocked her head. Who? She asked. Did she mishear me? Macy. She was bragging about her promotion. She wanted to visit too. I don't know what you're talking about, Alexis. Who's Macy? She asked. I stared at her, dumbfounded. Was it a joke or her mental state? My sister, your daughter, Mum, are you all right? Like, have you been having issues with your memory lately? It came off harsh, but I was genuinely concerned. Mum was only in her early 50s, and she was one of the smartest people I knew, with a killer memory. Are you messing with me? Since when did I have another daughter? She chuckled, passing this off like an off-color joke. Mum, did you fall recently? Have you been having headaches? Hallucinations? I stood from my seat, putting my hands on the table and leaning over her. I was touchy about her health. Dad went so suddenly, and the older she got, the more nervous I felt about her leaving me too. No, nothing like that. She looked at me, accusing and suspicious. What's going on with you? You've seemed a bit depressed. Mum, something's wrong. I'm taking you in for a checkup. I grabbed her hand and pulled her out of the chair. Hey, Alexis, she protested. I kept pulling her through the hall toward the door. As we neared the portraits, I stopped her. I grabbed the photo of Macy's graduation. Look! I shoved it in her face. Mum examined it, stupefied. What's this doing on the wall? Who is she? Mum touched the picture. Where have I seen her? Mum ran her hand down the photo in a trance. I reminded myself to breathe, inhaling sharply when the world blurred. Shit! I took out my phone and called Macy. The call connected. Hey, Macy, Mum's acting weird. I'm taking her to the hospital. Meet us there later. I paused for a response. Macy? Who is this? She answered. What do you mean? It's Alexis. Look at the goddamn caller ID. I screamed into the phone. Mum recoiled like a small animal, still looking at Macy's photo in disbelief. She was skittish, so I took it down a notch. Didn't want to scare her any more than I had. Oh, weird, Macy said from the phone. I have your number saved, but I'm blanking on who you are. Where did we meet again? Was it Justin's party? Why was she playing dumb? I clenched my phone in my fist until it dug into my skin. I screamed into the phone. Macy, if you're fucking with me now, it's a terrible time. I'm your sister, and Mum is not doing well. What the fuck is your problem? I'm an only child, you psycho, and my mum has been dead for 5 years. What? I stammered, mouth agape and eyes wide. I'm hanging up. Don't call me again. She ended the call. My phone fell from my hand and banged the hardwood floor. Mum jumped at the noise. Macy held us together after Dad died, building treasured memories, and now she betrayed me, acting like a stranger. Alexis, what's wrong with you? She touched my shoulder to comfort me as I struggled to steady my breathing. It was more than something being wrong with Mum. Something was wrong on a much larger scale. Nothing. I turned away from Mum. My world fell apart at the seams. Mum held my shoulder and felt my forehead, checking for a fever. I brushed her off. I need to get out and see what happened for myself. I'm going to work. I left Mum's side and headed for the door. Are you sure? I walked out without responding. I got in my car and drove off. The coffee shop was only a few blocks away. I peeled my eyes for anything off, and it didn't take long. After rounding one corner away from my house, I found the sidewalks absolutely packed with people. Hundreds of people stood shoulder to shoulder without moving an inch. They all looked up at the sky in complete silence. I followed their stares and spotted a large crack from the horizon in the sun. I slammed on the brakes, coming to a screeching halt in the middle of the road. A thin black network of lines fragmented the sky. There were people I'd seen before, neighbors and customers. I walked over to see what they were doing. One man near me looked familiar. He was a neighbor I'd spoken with before. A strange one, Daryl, also a conspiracy nut. He loved talking my ear off about the moon landing, even though I hated that kind of shit. Daryl noticed me and broke away from the sky. "What the hell is that?" I asked him when he met my eyes. "Can you believe it, Alexis?" Now that I was closer to the crowd, I noticed problems with the people gathered. One woman looked low definition. Her face seemed constructed from polygons like an old game. "Hey, Daryl, you see her too, right?" I got his attention back and pointed at the woman. He examined her for a moment and placed a hand on his chin. "Of course. Do you see something wrong with her?" I practically begged him to see what I did. She looked so out of place, a foreign invader. Just being near her sent waves of discomfort through me. Daryl considered her for a moment. Then he reached out to touch her. His hand drew close, and she didn't seem to notice. As his fingertips brushed her, cracks, just like those in the sky, spread over her body until thin black lines covered her. After a moment of stillness, the woman turned to me, looked me dead in the eyes, and whispered, "You'll have to catch it." She pointed behind me, and I turned to follow her finger. Across the street, a figure stood, arms down, made from hazy static. Just looking at it for more than a moment hurt my eyes. When I faced the woman again, I appraised her overly simplistic features. Her eyes looked painted on, and so did her nose and mouth. A crunching noise came from her body, and she exploded into countless pieces, showering me with weightless bits. I flinched, but no shards cut me. The shattering sound ruptured my eardrum, and I dropped to the floor, screaming and clutching my head. The crowd dispersed, scattering off in random directions. Some walked into houses I knew they didn't own. Others wandered off into bushes. Once the intense ringing quieted down, I pulled myself to my feet. Maybe I was in a state of denial, but I shut my mouth, grit my teeth, and moved forward, walking to my car. What else could I do? Hide under my bed? Beg my mum to go back to normal? All I had to go off was that strange woman's cryptic words. "You'll have to catch it." That thing she pointed off wandered into the bushes, just as the woman shattered. Hopefully, it would show up again, but I needed to understand what the hell was happening. Driving to the coffee shop, I couldn't keep my eyes on the road. My gaze kept wandering to the sky. I was living under a dome hit with a hammer. It was subtle, but lines slowly expanded and branched out further. I pulled up to the curb and ran through the back entrance into the shop to grab my shirt and apron. I walked inside and found Mike, my late-30s manager, in the back room fussing around with a dated computer the owner refused to replace. Like me, he kept to himself, so it wasn't too hard to deal with him. He was a hard ass, though. "You're late, Sam. That's not like you," he deadpanned, barely bothering to look up. I'd been working with him for a year, and he'd forgotten my name. "Mike, it's Alexis," I corrected him. This time, he gave me a proper look, going from my name tag to the shift schedule that hung on the wall. "Since when? Says on your tag and the schedule you're Sam, so I'll keep calling you that." He sounded incredulous, as if I wanted special treatment for calling me my real name. "Seriously?" I checked for myself, and sure enough, I was now Sam. I took out my wallet and inspected my driver's license, which had me named Sam too. "The fuck?" I muttered. "Look, I know this is going to sound crazy because it is, but have you noticed things changing around you, Mike? Like major life details?" I asked, slipping my wallet back into my pocket and scratching my neck. "Just get up front and man the register. We've already got more of a crowd than usual." He shooed me away. I expected it, but I didn't like it. As I took to the register, the crowd was staggering. A line formed outside the door and around the corner. None of them spoke a word. Hundreds of people looked straight ahead of the person before them. Their silence made for a jarring comparison with the quiet jazz filling the room. I stood before the terminal and faced the first man in line. "Hello, sir. What can I get started for you today?" The man stared at me blankly. He opened his mouth and acted like he was speaking, but no sound came out. "So you're not one of the normal ones?" I asked him. Some people nearby seemed real enough, but the ones like that guy were an anomaly. He kept mouthing words, picking up the pace. I waved a hand in his face. "Tell me what's going on here. What are you?" My shouts drowned out the jazz and broke the still atmosphere. Syllables poured from the man's lips, but none matched his mouth movements. "Why me? What did I do?" I reached out to shake his shoulders, but my hands hit an invisible barrier in front of him. His syllables formed words. It was a long sequence of numbers that repeated after 12 digits. He spoke too fast for me to catch them. Once he started reciting the numbers, the person behind him followed, then the next, until the entire line erupted in a chorus of counting. I ducked behind the counter and covered my good ear. I'd already lost hearing in one. I couldn't afford to lose the other. After probably 3 minutes, they ceased counting. Mike was either ignoring them or couldn't hear them, and I was alone with the crowd. I peeked over the counter and they were still there. But where their faces once displayed features, eyes, noses, mouths, now held only blank, flat flesh. I squeaked and hid under the counter again. There was no shuffling, no rustle of clothing, and no breathing. The jazz music slowed to a crawl. Static interfered with the playback, crackling and buzzing along with the music. There was no point in hiding. I couldn't do anything about that many people anyway. Once again, I raised my head over the hiding spot. Finally, the room was empty. Only one thing remained. A static figure standing outside the cafe, pushing its body against the window. Its body jerked to maintain human shape. "Catch it," the words echoed in my mind. Mike wandered into the cafe area. "Hey, I heard a bunch of footsteps. Why is the cafe empty?" I hadn't taken my eyes off the creature outside. Without responding, I vaulted over the counter and sprinted outside. "Hey!" Mike called after me, but I was long gone. The figure was a dozen yards ahead. I ran after it through the packed streets. The people that lined the sidewalks made stiff, simple movements, creaking forward like automatons. I had to weave through the crowd, shoulder bashing a few unfortunate passers-by, but I needed to keep that thing in sight. Instead of running, it would keep teleporting a short distance away from me. It was toying with me by letting me get close before moving out of reach. The surroundings were the same as my trip to work, and the trip was way shorter than it should have been. It led me back toward my home. Eventually, it teleported down the street and hovered over my door. Its body flickered, composed of flashing white and grey specks. "Wait!" I shouted after it. It let me come closer. Its body sharpened, taking on a more human form. I was in the driveway as it pointed upward. The crack nearly reached from one end of the horizon to the other, bisecting the sky. While I was distracted, the creature disappeared completely, leaving me standing, beaten on my doorstep. Shit! I banged the door with my fist. How could I catch something that teleported? Footsteps approached the door and someone pulled it open. I expected to see Mum, but a complete stranger around my age stood in the doorway. I jumped back, now on guard. "Who the fuck are you?" I backed away, reaching for my keys defensively. After looking closer, I noticed the man was Macy's boyfriend, her third that year. I can't say how many nights I endured tearful calls until the early morning. She bragged and showed pictures the last time I saw her, but I never caught his name. "What are you doing here? You aren't welcome here anymore." He blocked the door with his big frame. "This is my house." I tried to push past him, but he shoved me backward into the driveway. "Since when is this your house? After everything? After what you did to Mum? What the hell makes you think you'd be allowed back here?" "I have no idea what you're talking about. Let me in. Is Mum there? Did you do something to her?" I grabbed my keys from my pocket and brandished them at the man. "Do you really think she'd want to see you? You're the reason she hasn't left this place in months. Get the fuck away before I call the police." He stepped outside the doorway and toward me. His face glitched out, eyes and mouth vibrating and contorting until he looked like an entirely new person. "Your mother needed you, Sam. How could you have been so selfish? The things you said..." The new man grabbed me by the wrist. I drove the key into his midsection with my free hand, but he stood steadfast. Instead of blood, tiny pixelated dots spewed from the wound. The man threw me into the house and stood over me. "She never stopped waiting for your call. Mum would hover over your contact for hours, but she couldn't bring herself to reach out. You tore our family apart. How could she be so selfish?" Fuzzy tears streamed down his face. When they hit the floor, it disintegrated. I would never do anything to hurt Mum. Let me go. I need to find that thing and end this." I kicked at him. Where my foot connected, it sunk into him like quicksand made up his body. I wrenched it free and scooted against a wall. "Would you have been better in another life?" the man asked. I had no reply for the stranger. The man hung his head. I braced for something, tensing my body and raising my hands over my face protectively. His body vibrated until he was a blur. His rattling movements shook the house. I scooted, inching backward away from the chaos. Once he stopped vibrating, his body was all polygons, the same as the woman who had broken to bits in front of me. The man stopped breathing and went utterly stiff, stuck in a squat. I went to touch him, and the moment my finger grazed his body, he lost his balance, tipping forward. When his head contacted the floor, it shattered into chunks. The mess was bloodless. I jumped up and away from the debris. He never felt real in the first place, but his headless body, still petrified in a squat, made my skin crawl. I couldn't stand to be around it, so I left the house. I took out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. Mum was gone no matter how times my trembling finger scrolled through the list. I even looked for Macy's contact, knowing she'd forgotten me, but she was also missing. Fuck! It took everything I had not to hurl the phone across the street. I kept going through my contacts, holding back tears of frustration. At least half of them were missing, and I had no memory of dozens of names. Some names were complete nonsense, strings of letters creating gibberish. I found a contact where there were no letters or symbols at all. Instead, a patch of static spread through the screen. The call connected before I could press the button. I put the phone up to my good ear, and a shriek shot from the speaker, forcing me to recoil and yank the phone away.
As they come together, it all falls apart.
The words came out in a shrill whisper, then silence. What are you? What do I have to do to fix this? I begged for answers. I didn't know when I'd get to speak with whatever it was again. The sound on the other end crackled, then devolved back into shrieking so loud I threw my phone. The static caller ID filled the screen. then spilled from the glass into the material world. Flecks of grey and white flickered in and out of existence, spreading like wildfire, devouring everything they touched. The static took chunks of the sidewalk and quickly spread to the house. It coated every wall and blanketed the roof until the house dissolved into tiny dots. The static touched my shoe, immediately eating through it and gnawing at my flesh. There was no pain. If anything, it was soothing. It was like a swarm of flies scuttling on my body, an intense, tingling sensation. Swatting at it, shaking my leg, rolling on the concrete, none of it stopped the relentless encroachment. Instead of exposed flesh, it revealed a mess of pixels and geometry. Jagged, tiny cubes came together to form the structure of my legs, shifting in colour and size. Once the static dissipated, I was left standing in the middle of the road, where the tidal wave of static behind me had destroyed the whole block. I marvelled at what had become of my body, but I had little time before the static forced me to sprint back to the city. The crack in the sky had stretched from east to west, smaller fractures running out in all directions. Ahead, the town was deserted. Every car and pedestrian had vanished, and I didn't see anyone in restaurants or store windows. I passed by the coffee shop and the boutique Mum used to work at. The silence was sickening. Only the buzz of the fuzzy specks broke through it. The static behind me could have caught up, but it kept pace with me, purposely trailing a few steps behind. I stood in the center of an intersection as a world crumbled around me. Catch it. That's all I could think of doing, but it hadn't shown itself. The static overtook me and filled the surrounding street, only leaving a small circle for me to stand in. The being rose from the ground before me, more humanoid than ever. It hovered just far enough away that I would fall to my death if I lunged for it. "Is it over now?" I asked. There was nowhere left to run, nothing left to do. Every aspect of my life was severed until I was left in a decaying, vacant world. "There's nothing left. What do you want me to do?" I questioned the static being, pushing through a sudden heaviness in my chest. The being morphed. Its static became smooth skin, and its blank head gained features. "Mum?" It took my mum's form just a moment, but immediately morphing again. It became masculine and taller. My dad, the last day I saw him, down to each mole. It changed again. Wait! Couldn't it at least give me a second with him? I didn't care how fake it was. I didn't care that none of it would matter. Just seeing his face was enough. But it ignored my begging and shifted again. This time, it stabilized as me. "Are you done?" I asked, only met with silence. "Is any of this real? Am I?" I shouted at it. "Are you not going to answer me? What was the point of this? Just to fuck with me?" I looked down at what was left on my leg. Whatever I was looking at wasn't human. The static being shifted back to my father.
"Tell me about myself,"
it said. Its voice sounded distant, like when Macy and I used walkie-talkies. "You're my dad. You died 7 years ago." It was all I could think of. The thing that looked like my dad floated closer.
"Details,"
it demanded, only a foot from my face. Its skin wasn't perfect. The colors blended and fluctuated. Why would it need details? I searched for something to add, but came up empty. How could I forget memories of Dad?
"You don't remember?"
Nothing came to me. I had images, but nothing more than pictures on the wall. I knew I loved him. At least that sounded right. The creature became Mum.
"Me?"
It asked. That one was easy. How could I forget anything about the woman who raised me? and held my hand through the darkest times.
What are you asking me for? This is ridiculous. You're my mother. Mid-50s, caring, a bit needy.
That was all I had.
Name?
It asked in its grating voice. I didn't know. How could I not know? I looked at her, then down to my leg and back. I remember her taking Macy and me to the park to feed ducks when we were young. But what park? And where did that happen? There were no parks near our home. What about the days at the aquarium? We used to get the year pass. But why couldn't I remember what dolphins looked like?
The details were irrelevant to this route.
It explained, meandering around in my vision. The pool of static in front of me danced on the street. I reached out and touched it with the tips of my fingers. They disintegrated, leaving more exposed geometry like what my leg became.
Defective route,
It said simply. The being turned back to static and merged with the mess on the ground, leaving me completely alone in the vast, empty world. The static surroundings crept closer. At least whatever had happened was ending. I couldn't even mourn the life I lost. It was never mine to begin with. As the world ended around me, that immense emptiness that filled my life before waking from that dream immersed me. The sky was fractured beyond repair, a vast spiderweb that blanketed the universe. I lay on my back and watched the cracks spread the final distance before they destroyed reality. The static was inches away. The sky shattered, creating a noise as loud as the Big Bang. Billions of shards rained down from the heavens, and the static covered my body like a billion tiny bees, converting it to nothingness.
Reattempting.
The word echoed in my mind as everything ended. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy these stories, be sure to click subscribe and check out some more stories here.